The gentleman to my left, I have known for more years than I care to remember. He almost had me for a boss, but he fled the Daily News to the greener pastures of the Post just before I arrived on the scene. But if there is a Mr. Media in this town, it is Keith Kelley. I'm sure you are all as devoted readers as I am of his Media Inc. column every Wednesday and Friday. Did you all read it this morning? I hope you did. Well, you should be. I mean, what other reason is there to subscribe to the Post? Which you should all be doing, of course. Right? In addition to that, he has many other interests. First, he has the Kelley Gang, which he helped found, and every St. Patty's Day they gather with a whole host of their friends and supporters at Michael's to raise money for some eminently worthy charities. Then he's part of the backbone of the writers team in the Writers and Artists annual softball game every August in East Hampton, another worthy charitable undertaking. But for today, Keith has offered to regale us with some great tales of the media world where he devotes most of his time and his incredible talents. There's one final thing I can tell you about him, by the way, of our guest of honor, is that he likes to converse. So that's exactly what we're going to do between the two of us, then open it up, as usual, for questions, which I'm sure there'll be many from all of you. So, Keith, to start us off, you mentioned that you were of the opinion that, I'm going to quote from your email to me, there will always be some print, but much smaller scale. What does that mean for you? What kind of scale, and how does that scale support the kind of resources necessary to cope with, for instance, a Trump presidency?
Well, I think it'll be a smaller scale because, you go back in time and everything seems to have been about 90% cheaper. So the circulation is down for everybody because at one point there was a massive amount of advertising dollars flocking to the bigger circulation titles. Nowadays, for better or worse, a lot of that advertising dollars are being directed to digital, so the cheap circulation is no longer a good thing. It means you got to print and mail and truck things around without a lot of advertising to support it. It becomes unprofitable. So I think what they're going to do is there'll be a core group of people that want to buy a magazine or a newspaper, and they'll pay a premium price for it. And the advertising will still be good. The advertising rates will be a little bit lower. And there'll still exist a core print. The funny thing is, in my world, when I cover digital publishers, as we've all expanded the horizon, they'll all ask me, "Is this going to be in the paper tomorrow?" Now, I don't really care where it goes. I put it in on the web or Twitter or wherever.
Really, but don't you think it gets more visibility in the print paper than online or wherever?
It depends. A lot of it is the same version. Sometimes a longer version is on the web since you're not boxed in by the constraints.
So you'll write longer sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. I keep all the copy editors in business because I write long. I could do a page every day. Some of the stuff that I leave out is, to me, more interesting than what gets in there, but it's like the subplots of a story, But I still think there'll be a core print edition. For one, advertising in print has integrity. The people like it. The advertisers kind of accept the fact that, okay, there's a staff, there's a manufacturing process, and there's a delivery process. And if it costs $50,000 to advertise in Vanity Fair, they might try to get it down to $45,000. Whereas the digital guys, they say, we're going to charge $25,000. And the guy says, well, how about $5,000? And you say, okay, that's your introductory rate. Well, guess what? That's your rate. It's not going to go up. You're not going to come back next year and the same advertiser is going to, quintuple his ad spend with you. His boss will say, why do we, we're getting the same thing. So that's the problem. One problem. The introductory rate is there's constant downward pricing pressure on digital advertising, and it's getting worse. Facebook and Google have 80% of the market. Somebody said Google runs about $5 billion worth of revenue against content that it had no hand at all in producing. So that's another problem, the Facebook, Google problem. Programmatic advertising is another one. They don't care where the ads are appearing. sometimes they end up on, horrible websites, and the advertiser didn't know they were there. He just wanted 18 to 34 or 18 to 45-year-old males, and all of a sudden he's on a site that's for the Ku Klux Klan. And they had a couple of the big advertisers said we got to stop doing that. J.P. Morgan Chase and Procter and Gamble, and they pulled back dramatically.
Well, but Google Ads has said that you can say, I don't want to be on a certain kinds of site, right?
They're fine-tuning it
Yeah.
because of blowback.
Right.
Definitely, absolutely. The problem with Google is basically that they're taking content and not paying anything for it.
Right.
So my prediction would be somewhere down the road, Facebook and Google are going to run into, I think, antitrust problems. They can't gobble up 80% of the market and not be held accountable.
You know, when I came to New York in 1965, yes, I'm dating me, for my first job before Columbia Journalism, there were 6 daily newspapers, there were 6 television stations, and basically that summer was when WINS launched its All News. I went to work for them as a copy boy. Now there are 3 newspapers, there's 600 different television stations or, cable or what have you. And yet the advertising pie it's increased like 3-fold. It's gone to 600-fold on the variety. So the pie is being sliced ever that much thinner. Can that thinner slice sustain the kind of covers that most of us in this room are used to having provided most of our lives?
That's why I think the future is going to be a very multimedia operation. Even the legacy print people, they all pretty much recognize it. They're all trying to figure out how to get there. It's a little bit disconcerting, though, when you look at like the top 5 digital sites, the Vice, the Vox, Refinery 29, BuzzFeed, Group 9. None of them make money. They're all 9-figure revenue producers, 100 million or more. I think Vice is probably up around 600 or 700 million. They all lose money.
Why? I mean, why can't they simply cut back the staff to the?
I think Vice is closer to it. They just hired the former publisher of the New York Post to go over there. So I think they're the biggest, and I think they may be closer to it. It's one of the problems is, though, that in the early days, all you had to do was get venture capitalists to believe in you, and they would throw more money in. A lot of those guys are just using that money to buy traffic. So to the unskilled, it looked like, wow, the website is booming, but it wasn't really booming. Instead of putting out news that attracted people to your site, naturally, organically, you were buying traffic. You were buying keywords, and it was coming there. I think most of the venture capital guys have caught on to it, and they're not really throwing that money in, which is why you see certain things like Gawker and Mike and selling at ridiculously reduced prices from what they were selling at just 3 years ago or 4 years ago, because they realize even these cool, trendy digital guys, at the end of the day, you got to make money, and that's that day of reckoning is coming around. So I think it's going to be a bigger shakeout of digital publishers. The good ones will survive. A lot of the other ones won't.
Well, it's interesting. When I was at Forbes.com, the mantra was page views. You got to have clicks. You got to have so many page views. And so I said, we could do Forbes's world's 10 best bikini beaches, and we'd get incredible.
The 10 drunkest cities.
And so you know what they said? Yeah. Oh, that's a great idea. Let's do it. And we did do it. And it blew
like a mad horse.
Blew the covers off all of it. And so then we were really in trouble because that's the kind of stuff we had to do in the future.
Yeah.
So is that going to be the lowest? We're going to spin down to the lowest common denominator then?
I think that pure traffic game is coming to an end. I don't think it's totally ended, but I think the only way they're going to get premium prices if people say, hey, this is the kind of site I want to go on. Part of it is an advertising agency problem. The young kids are just fascinated with digital. The ad agencies are in a lot of trouble because they kind of lost track of their basic idea is the purpose of an ad is to make you want to buy stuff. Doesn't mean that you have to click on it that second, although that's an added service that digital can do that print and TV couldn't in the past. But they have to create a desire to want that car, that pair of shoes, that clothing line. And I'm not 100% sure. I have young kids, 2 kids in college, 1 in high school. I ask them, hey guys, what ads do you remember when you're looking at your phone? And they don't remember any ads. This is a problem. If everything is on your phone, it's a great vehicle for information, but it's a pretty crappy vehicle for advertising. So it's a failure of ad agencies to kind of come to terms with really what they got to do in a lot of ways. Ultimately, I think there's got to be some paywall. They're starting to construct a lot of them and trying to get not enormous revenue from consumers, but some revenue from consumers. And it has to be that way. Everything can't be free.
You know, some time ago, NPR, not NPR, PBS did a survey of television viewers. And I think they actually chose Seattle, the Seattle area in Washington, which is a very specific place. But this was back in many years ago. And they tried to understand where people got their information. They discovered that they got impressions from television, but they got information that they remembered from newspapers. And I've never forgotten that since then. So I guess the question then becomes, who are the survivors in the future? You name actually a few places like Cosmopolitan, I think you said ESPN. Are these kinds of places the survivors?
Well, I think what you see in a lot of companies doing, one of Hearst, they've done it very well for a long period of time. Frank Banach took, when Cosmo was the biggest, one of the most profitable magazines in the country, he took the profits from that, bought 20% of ESPN for $167 million. At the time, I thought, that's ridiculously cautious. Why did he only buy 20%? A more aggressive guy might have gone 50%. But ESPN, even in the age of cost cutters, is valued at about $30 billion, as a valuation. So clearly his 20% of ESPN was generating more than the entire magazine division.
So why did he just buy the whole thing then?
I think he was locked into it. It was already somebody else's idea. It wasn't something that he cooked up, and they were looking for a minority partner. Once I dug into it a little bit more, I realized they were only selling 20%. Even if he wanted 50, it wasn't. I think they were a naturally cautious company at the time, but even if they wanted 50 wasn't for sale.
So what's the secret formula? I mean,
just by what they've done more recently. I was joking around. One of the presidents of the magazine division was giving me good-natured ribbing because I started a column saying Hearst is buying boring stuff and making a lot of money. They bought Fitch Financial Services. They bought some other aviation. I'm not even really sure what they do. It's test parts on private airplanes, and all these private airplanes got to run these tests on this thing. I have no idea what this thing is. I just know it makes a ton of money for them. So somebody in Hearst, not a Hearst, not a descendant of the founder, but somebody is buying Fitch, and now that's the most profitable wing of the country. It's a financial services thing. I presume it competes with Dodge or Sweets or something like that. Standard & Poor's, Dun & Bradstreet. I really don't know what it does. It just makes a lot of money. And that's what a lot of companies are going to do. They can't just say, all right, the days when media was gloriously 10 and 20% increases every year, boy, that was great. That was a hot industry to ride up. But you can't make profit off of nostalgia. You got to go whatever the new hot industry is.
Fitch does bond ratings.
And if it means diversifying out of media, you can do it. Media can be run profitable, probably smaller. You can still make money on it. It's not going to go up the way it once was. This is not a phase that will fade and boom again. This is not like a early 90s recession. This is systemic changes to the industry, and you got to recognize and you got to run the portfolios like that.
Fitch does bond ratings, which means every single bond that ever gets issued has to be rated, has to get a Fitch rating.
Fitch.
So you talk about must-haves. That's what must-haves is in that industry. So they bought a must-have in that industry. So they did it right.
Yeah, and you look at Bloomberg. Bloomberg, he only has like 300,000 customers, but they play 25,000 a year
at $2,000. Yeah, right. At $2,000 a month, right?
Yeah, so that's a pretty damn successful business. Now he has a media operation. He's got Bloomberg Business Week, but they don't make any money. They don't have to make money because the thing that the consumers or the business people are paying for, must have information, makes a ton of money. And it was designed by a guy that worked in the field, so he really knew, you know what would be a really good thing to have? It can't be like a strategy thing. It's got to be somebody that understands in his gut what businesses or people need and design a product to do it. The Model T Ford, you know.
Tell us what some of the most colossal mistakes you think are.
Oh, colossal mistakes.
You mentioned a couple to me. I'll remind you. Time thinks they made a colossal mistake in not selling itself to Egbert Bronfman and Leon Blatt.
Oh, you mean mistakes that
that you uncovered? Yeah.
Well, I thought you meant mistakes I made.
No. Oh God, you make mistakes? No, I've never seen a correction in a Keith Kelley column ever.
Now we just fix it on the web, and that's good as
that's right.
That's right. No, I did make one mistake where two people were convicted of embezzling. One went to jail, and one turned state's evidence. So it didn't
and you
get
got the wrong one doing which?
Nah, I knew the other guy was in jail, but I didn't know his trusted assistant was not in jail, and I said they were both in jail. It wasn't a story about the jail term. It was about something unrelated, and it's always those little threads at the end, you know, a button that said, the suit looks fine, but your button's unbuttoned, you know? And that's what happened. So months later, they say, we're going to sue. So my lawyer goes onto the web, because I found out the next day that the person was still at large, got probation. So I switched it on the web. So the lawyer goes, I can't find anything. You know, he can't find the print edition of the paper either. I tell you the truth, I don't even know what happened to the lawsuit. I think it was basically settled, and for basically nothing. But it's always those vague little facts that you unravel. It's not the main story. It's not in terms of mistakes that I've seen corporations make. Well, I mean, I was there at AOL Time Warner merger, and Jerry Levin was ecstatic that news had not leaked anywhere before they announced it. And I think the problem was the motivation was fear and greed. He was afraid somebody else would merge with AOL, and he was greedy, thinking that was the ticket to fame. And he lost track of the fact that keeping the press out of the loop is not really a corporate aim. You know, it's kind of gratifying if you're the CEO that you pulled off a deal nobody caught wind of. But that doesn't mean the deal is a good deal. The deal was a terrible deal. You know, based on overvaluations, based on not realizing that AOL was kind of an aging, it was going to lose all its dial-up customers to new technology. You know, they were saying, oh, AOL is just like Time Inc. We have a consumer revenue and an advertising revenue stream, but they didn't realize that the consumer revenue stream was being obliterated, and it was the worst merger in corporate history. So that was a colossal one where we saw firsthand. On day one, though, it looked good. All those people with Time Warner 401ks were transferred into overnight millionaires. The stock was zooming until the market caught up and said, no, none of these AOL guys know what they're doing. They can't run media. They're like a tech company that happened to hit it lucky. For AOL, it was the greatest merger of all time, because they were going to be out. They were going to be, lost as technology overtook what they did. For Time Warner, a sad lesson.
And some people still have AOL email accounts.
Yeah, well, now they're free. Right. You're not paying for them anymore. So now it's a good thing to have, because you ain't paying for it.
That's right. Well, that's a good point. Now we know why Mort has one.
Yeah, more recent bad deal was the Time Inc. board rebuffed Edgar Bronfman and Kriaz and Blavatnik from taking over. They were offering $18 a share, and they rebuffed them twice. I remember coming back from Thanksgiving, and we broke the story like at 2 in the morning. It was like 10 o'clock when I got the story, and I said, should we bang it out for the print edition? He goes, I'm not going to, it's Sunday of Thanksgiving weekend. He says, just put it online. That way nobody else can duplicate the story. Whoever wants to cover that story that day, they're going to have to attribute to the New York Post. Because at 2 in the morning, even if you're really wide in with these guys, there's no way you're going to get out of bed and find somebody. So we ran it. Reuters picked it up and credited us. The Times grudgingly first reported in the New York Post. Everybody had a part. Now, I still think to this day that if Time had sold to them, it would have tipped the company upside down. They had all kinds of multimedia, Blavatnik and Warner and Bronfman, Warner Music. They'd already seen an industry totally obliterated by digital. So they kind of lived through a horrendous experience. I think they could have brought a lot of that new energy, video, podcast, the whole multimedia world. It would have upended a lot of what Time Inc. did, but there still would have been a core, which I think would have been the smartest thing, and Time Inc. would still exist. So they rebuffed them. A year later, they sell, instead of $18 a share, they sell it to $18.50 a share. Time Inc. disappears. The amount of layoffs are probably similar to what would have happened if Bronfman, Blavatnik, and Kriaz had gotten it. And the company would still be in business.
Time is still sort of in business, I mean, right?
The magazines individually are, but there's no Time Inc.
Oh, yeah.
The day one, they were up there with, we had pictures of the workers taking down the Time Inc. sign, putting up the Meredith sign. I mean, if I was Meredith, I would have taken over and changed my name to Time Inc.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, with that, we are going to open it up to questions from everybody else here. Please wait for Mike Candell, our eminent microphone person. And there we have the first one.
Yes, my name is Andy Fisher. I spent 25 years in radio. Is radio dead?
Nah, radio's still fine. It's
How about Sirius? Is Sirius not killing regular terrestrial radio?
I'm not as close to radio as I am to some of the other legacy things. It's obviously they have a lot of companies that are over leveraged. They miscalculated that what the market was going to bear, and they're going through retrenchments on that. But I don't think they're going to go away. But I think they like everybody else, have to change. I think they have a tougher time, I think, convincing people to go to, like I'm listening to WCBS News Radio, and if you want to see a picture of this guy who held somebody up, go to our website. It's kind of funny that you're a non-visual medium telling people to go to the website, which is a visual medium. So that's I don't really know the ins and outs of the industry, but that's like a hurdle that they have to overcome. I think they can do it, but like everybody else, it's going to have to be, the core is going to be smaller, and they got to diversify.
But doesn't the CBS brand generally, the WCBS brand, don't they all have a joint website so that you go to the WCBS website? Don't you? You also get to WINS. You also get to Channel 2. You get, that kind of thing.
To tell you the truth, I don't know. I'm in my car. I can't go to the website.
Good point. Okay, who's next?
Keith,
Yeah,
you work for Rupert Murdoch,
I do.
who's a newspaper man by inclination, by training, by inheritance. How much interference do you suffer from him?
I don't think he bothers me at all. Thankfully, I don't cover politics. So I remember early on, one of the stories where they told me I had to cover this was News Corp had a golfing magazine that they were launching, and they wanted me to cover it. I don't mind covering it, but you already gave the scoop to the Journal yesterday. Why? I said, so what is this supposed to be, a maximum puff piece? I think it was called Maximum Golf. So they said, no, just cover it. We're going to do a little column item. So he doesn't really interfere. Now, I don't really cover News Corp because there's a drawback to that. If I find something out about News Corp, the credit I get in the field is Rupert gave the story to Keith Kelley, therefore it's not a real scoop. The other problem is if I do get a scoop and it's a material thing, that's a big SEC problem. What the hell are you giving this stuff to your internal guy when all the shareholders should know this information? So basically, I cover announcements. They usually have another reporter doing the earnings reports. Just easy layups. I'm not, and I'm sorry when people ask. I say I don't cover News Corp. That's the way it goes. The Journal does, though. They're in a slightly different way. So, my politics doesn't never entered into the question.
What do you see as the future of the Murdoch empire, and who's going to be taking over, and what's going to happen to all the properties as part of it?
Well, I think obviously they sold off so much of Fox. They're all individually extremely, I think it was an $80 billion deal. So I think, like everybody else, they're going to face the same problems of how do we diversify into areas that are not necessarily media related. One of the fastest growing divisions at News Corp is Realtor.com, real estate listings, competes with Zillow. And I think that's just a strategy that all the big companies are doing. I think with the movie studios, you realize even as big as they were, they didn't have critical mass. He'd rather take the money and give it to somebody that does have critical mass. So I think at its core, Rupert loves newspapers. I don't think that's ever going to diminish. The kids, everybody looks on like Lachlan as, oh, he's from Australia. But the reality is when Rupert first came to America, old timers at the Post said, yeah, the kids were always running amok at knocking over things inside the Post. So they had a lot of exposure to the ins and outs of newspapering. And they don't talk to me, but my hope is that they keep, the Post and a lot of the other publications going. But I think, like everybody else, they're going to have to push into more deals like Realtor.com and diversify.
So maybe the Daily News is waiting until the Murdochs decide they don't want anything to do with the Post anymore, and they'll be the ultimate last man standing.
They used to say, "Oh, New York can only support one tabloid," and now with the News, I don't know what's going to happen with News. I worked there. My father was a pressman at the News. When I was a kid, we all read it from the back to the forward, and then, sports were in the back. I lived it as a kid, so I have a lot of feel for the place, but it's
You hate it. When I read your column, you hate the Daily. You're always trying to slam the Daily.
Well, I'm pointing out their shortcomings. Although, when I was with the Daily News for a few years, I would point out
Post shortcomings.
So
Over here
Yeah.
from the
Sure.
from the Newsday table. We've been through Mark Willis, the serial killer, a moniker I think you may have coined at the New York Post, and Sam Zell, the bottom feeder, which I think predates you, but I'm not sure. Now, of course, Newsday was owned by the Dolans, and my question to you, and since I think you interviewed me when the Murdoch and Dolans were circling around Newsday, looking at those moguls, who would have been better off to own Newsday? And do you have any facts or fun tips or sleazy gossip that you might want to share with us of these entrepreneurs of journalism who actually have a lot of influence, even now?
Yeah, I don't think it's anything new, but the Sam Zell actually was the owner, and he approached Murdoch and said, do you want to buy it? And I forget what the price was. I think it was something around 500 something. And they actually were fairly serious.
That's million.
Yeah, 500 million. More than that. Then Sam Zell, being an extremely disreputable guy, goes to Zuckerman and says the Post wants to buy it for whatever, 500. I said maybe it was 550. So Zuckerman says, I'll match that, because he doesn't want us getting a toehold on Long Island and outflanking them. And then the Dolans, at the time of Cablevision, had tremendous cash, and they had to do something. They grew up on Long Island. They probably revered Newsday, remembering it from his glorious days. They went and offered $650. And I think Zell, in his naivety, thought, well, Rupert really wanted it, and he's going to outbid the Dolans. But he was trying to buy the Wall Street Journal, and his point is, I gave you a good full price. Take it if you want it at that price. And I don't think he's looked back. I think the Dolans miscalculated by massive amounts of. Whenever the public documents would come out, Newsday was never making any money for them. I don't know how they went from being the only newspaper in a monopoly situation to losing 30 and 40 million a year, but they did.
You say they're still losing that, you think?
I don't know because the numbers aren't publicly reported, but I mean, I know the price of the paper. I think the Sunday paper is like $5 now or something.
And well, you guys in daily, $2 for a day for the New York Post.
Yeah, that's a
How
lot.
is that sustainable?
I don't know what their. I think what it is a strategy of people that really want it pay a premium price for it, and they're pushing the digital. Certain places have been able to put up paywalls that charge, and I presume maybe that's I don't really know what the strategy is, but it's certainly the print strategy seems to be if you really want it, you have to pay for it. It's a premium product. We still have a ton of sports writers.
What I find amazing is that, and I read this somewhere, I was telling you about it, the Boston Globe has become the first newspaper to have more online subscribers than print subscribers. So is that direction everybody's going?
Yeah, well, they have subscribers, so that's good. It means they're reaping some benefit from it. We have traffic. I mean, some days New York Post is over 100 million, so we're beating a lot of the the digital
100
darling
million
uniques per month.
Wow.
I think ComScore at last time around publicly available info said we were in the 60 million range, which means that we're beating a lot of the digital darlings. We're beating a lot of the BuzzFeeds and all those. But so that's part of the strategy, I presume. But there's got to be the next step is then getting all the digital to, as I say, monetize. So that's the next step. So we'll see how that goes.
Right.
Did you see the show Ink?
Which one?
Ink, I-N-K, about Murdoch in England.
I did not see that. No. I read about it, but
Anybody here see that play? Interesting. Go see it, Keith.
yeah, I do know Rupert Murdoch's real first name. Can anybody guess? All right, that's it.
That's not fair. He probably worked for the Post at one point.
I did get to ask him when I worked for the Daily News why he used Rupert instead of Keith, and in his clip Australian accent, he basically said, "My father's name was Keith." I'm like, okay, answers that.
My name is Milt Estero. I have a question again about the Murdoch empire. There's been speculation that Lachlan, who appears to have emerged as closest to Rupert, is a little bit more liberal or less conservative than Murdoch. Do you get any vibrations about that relationship?
I somewhere recently said that he was actually the more conservative of the two brothers, which surprised me. So I don't really know where he stands politically. I mean, I know him and he knows me, but we're not confidants. So I do not know. From published versions, James seemed to have been the more liberal brother.
And James has the what part of the empire does James have?
I think he's out.
He's out completely.
Yeah, there was some talk when they first talked about that Disney thing that he would become a top executive in Disney, but I never thought that was going to happen, and it didn't happen. So I think he's figuring out how to spend his share of the proceeds, and he'll make some investment somewhere.
Keith, could you sketch out for us what you think the advertising landscape will be for the 2020 presidential election? I mean, where should we be looking? Facebook, the New York Times?
Oh, and by the way,
Twitter.
Alan was spent much of the lunch trying to convince Keith to write a book about this. So.
Yeah, in all honesty, I'm not wired into the ad side as well as I like to. I mean, I would think I don't think I have any more knowledge than the average person on. It'll be Facebook spends, Twitter spends, TV in election years booms, so that will go up, especially if you're in one of the battleground states of Florida or Pennsylvania. New York TV stations, radio stations, they're probably not going to get anything because pretty much everybody knows which way New York is going to vote, so they're not going to do big ad spends here. But I think social media will get an enormous share of it, and I think television will get an enormous share of it, and radio, somewhat. But radio and television only in the battleground states.
Let me follow up with which ad agencies are the most politically adept?
I'm not close enough to give a intelligent answer on that one.
I think that at one point you said you think influencers are a big problem, and I'm curious as to what you meant by that.
Oh, yeah. Well, influences like Kim Kardashian has a face cream and said, wow, this is great. Took away all my wrinkles and stuff, and puts it on Instagram. She gets paid about $1 million or something. Now, people don't know that she's getting paid $1 million. They think, wow, Kim, and now I can go out and buy this thing. And FTC sent out like 75 warning letters about a year ago saying, hey, this is a warning, that's advertising and you're not disclosing it. But they didn't really fine anybody. There's been one or two minor things where, like, I think the National Enquirer ran something on their front page that was really an advertorial, and they didn't label it as such, and they got.
But that's more the ad council that worries about that. No, I mean the
well, it's
government?
FTC. I mean, the ad council worries about that, but the Federal Trade Commission has got pretty strict guidelines on a lot of the digital publishers. They're trying to disguise their ads as if they were stories. They call it native advertising, and because it's called native because it's not supposed to be differentiated from the native editorial. Except the FTC says, well, the consumer can't tell the difference between something written by a journalist and somebody written by the ad staff. If you run it in the same typeface, not labeling it, that's wrong. You can't do that. But there have been minor enforcement things. It's wrong. But, I mean, the whole basis of native advertising is to trick you into thinking that it is editorial. So you're asking them to almost self-police a policy and a tactic that was meant to deceive. So it's chickens, the fox guarding the hen house.
It's also kind of like it's not really quite fair, is it? Because on television and in films, you have these placements where you see someone open up an Apple computer, and that the product placement, Apple's paid to get that Apple computer on the screen, and they don't say, oh, by the way, the Apple computer was what was paid for to be on that set, right? So I mean, in some ways, that's
product placement
double standard, right?
Yeah, it is a little bit. The FTC hasn't really weighed in on movie placements, as far as I know. So, but I guess if it looks out of place, it's going to not work well in the movie. Like if a guy is drinking, something that nobody would ever touch, it's going to look. Now, somebody using an Apple computer.
Well, Game of Thrones, there was that Starbucks cup that found its way on.
Oh yeah.
Keith, over here.
Sure.
Keith, just wondering, with all the trends that you've been watching and seeing and the deals and everything else, would you venture a guess 5, maybe even 10 years out of what the New York and the national media scene is going to look like?
Probably more 10 than 5, right? But
yeah, well, I think all the survivors, look at, I'll give Condé Nast as an example. We started running stories that said in 2017, they lost $100 million. We got no blowback. So I said to my colleague, Alex Steigart, I says, you know what that means? They lost more than $100 million. That's why they're not complaining. And then the Times eventually caught up and said it was 120, and now that's the number that they lost in 2017. In 2018, the real number hasn't leaked out yet. They said they cut their losses, which means, okay, you lost another, maybe you cut it down to 80. So now in the last 2 years, you lost $200 million. Now, the new houses sold a lot of their cable holdings for, 15, 16 billion. So they're not as under the gun as, say, Time Inc. But even really wealthy private individuals don't like to just prop up these things and they're not generous souls. They're not doing this for charity. They want the damn thing to make money. So they brought in somebody from Pandora, and he's now the CEO because I presume the previous CEO, they didn't like his plan.
Wait, Pandora is CEO of Condé Nast?
Yeah, a guy named Roger Lynch. So they threw out Bob Sauerberg.
But how did the magazines think about having a guy from Pandora, a radio guy, running Condé Nast?
I don't know. there seems to be, they recognize that whatever they were doing wasn't working, I think. He hasn't really fired anybody, so he hasn't really had, they've had a lot of downsizings when a print person was running it. I think the recognition is that, look, we got to turn this thing around. I wouldn't be surprised if in 2 years, if it hasn't made a dramatic turn, the family says, well, you know what? We don't really have to do magazines. They haven't done that yet. I think they really want it to succeed. They don't have the same quarter-to-quarter pressures as a publicly traded Time Inc. But Time Inc. 15 years ago was making $1.2 billion in profit. By the time they sold, they were still making money, but it was only $400 million. And while there had been a lot of wrenching downsizings, their profits are 2/3 smaller, and the company was not 2/3 smaller in terms of people. So that's a problem. The salaries of the top executives, they weren't 2/3 smaller. They were at the same price when they were making $1 billion. That's a problem. So you got to go with the time. You really, in media and everywhere else, you got to live in the present tense. You can't be nostalgic. Oh, remember when this was no. It ain't like that. You got to live in the present tense. You got to change. You got to be nimble, and you've got to diversify. Videos, podcasts, over the top networks.
Do you consider yourself an enemy of the people?
No, I resent the categorization. They're all colleagues. They all work hard. We all try to get the story out.
At lunch you were telling me that in terms of going back to Betsy's question about the media landscape, what it looks like. You mentioned that you thought maybe the Daily News didn't have much longer.
Well, I think they turn 100 in October, so they'll get a lot of the display ads saying congratulations on the Daily News turning 100. And then in November and December, everybody makes money because the retailers still advertise Christmas advertising. So they'll probably have a profitable month or two then. Then in January, that's the barren wasteland of newspaper advertising. I don't know what would happen, but I think if they make any move to go all digital, it would happen around then. A big problem for them was when Tribune Company bought it for $1, assumed the liabilities.
About the Tribune.
Tribune did, yeah.
Oh, about the Daily News, I'm sorry. Right.
Bought the Daily News for $1. And then the idea was, well, we'll have a Daily News. We own the Chicago Tribune and we own the LA Times. Within a few months, they had sold the LA Times. So the rationale for having purchased the News as one of the 3 big city papers disappeared when they sold the LA Times and San Diego paper. They got $500 million for it. So they got a good premium price. Smart to sell it, but it does kind of strand the News now. And then they fired, half the staff. They're down to 40 people. You can't cover a city with 40 people. It's, as I said to other people when we ran some editorials at the Times, it's a tabloid war. It's sports. You want to win, but you don't want to win in sports because your opponent has had a heart attack and died on the field. It's like you want to beat him because you're both on a story and you got a better story. So it's sad what's going on with them. And I don't, part of the problem is Tribune is also in flux, and they're talking maybe they'll merge with Gannett or maybe somebody else will try and take them over. So there's a little bit of uncertainty. The corporate guys aren't going to make any particular move until they find out what their own future is there. But I think
it was the Times-Picayune, New Orleans Times-Picayune, which was one of the great newspapers in America for many, many years. They went back to basically to, I think, a 2 or 3 day publication, the rest online.
Yeah.
Maybe they'd start looking at models like that.
Well, yeah, but it didn't work out too well for them. They sold it to an upstart rival who was staffed by all ex-Times-Picayune people who got laid off over the past 2 years. He had a couple of the suburban papers, and he said, hey, we'll start going into New Orleans. And, that's owned by the billionaire Newhouse family. But again, they liked it when it made money for them. And now that it's not, they said, well, that's it. Tossed in the towel. I think the name will survive, but there's no Times-Picayune anymore. It's gone.
Those of us who live in the past tense are hoping that Condé Nast doesn't ever kill the New Yorker.
Oh, somebody will buy the New Yorker.
Yeah, I was
guarantee
going to
that.
say, you have any?
Well, they're one of the people that can charge for information. They're a thought leader publication.
You have a great website.
They got a tremendous website. They're very hip. They have a lot of knowledge and a lot of power. That will be sold for a nice profit.
To whom?
That I don't know. The big buyers.
To a billionaire.
The big buyers are like
Private equity.
Not private equity.
No?
No, I don't think it'd be private equity because they don't see enough of an upside anymore. They're kind of scared of it. I think the fact we were reporting today that Forbes is on the block because the Chinese investors, this is their 5th year, and they didn't find the quick exit strategy that they hoped. I think the valuation when they bought it was $475, and their arch rival Fortune just sold a couple of months ago for $150. So they're not going to get out with anything close to what they got in with. So
Again, that's all in millions, by the way.
yeah, but the New Yorker will get a nice hefty premium price. I Conde doesn't disclose, but every indication they give to me is the New Yorker makes good money.
And they would want to just keep the one thing that really does make the money?
Would they want to?
Hmm.
If Newhouse was still around, he sure would. But he had been, even before he passed, was kind of, he's suffering from a long downward dementia, Alzheimer's, whatever it was. So for the last 5 or 6 years before he died, he wasn't having any input on it. So it's Donald is pretty old. Stephen, I think, is the heir apparent, Donald's son. I think he likes it, but again, if it doesn't make him a lot of money, he figures he could do other things.
Is Vanity Fair losing money? And
I don't know.
Has it gone down since Graydon Carter left?
I think it's gone down dramatically. Part of it is just a systematic problem with newsstand. They're trying to diversify, but
And now Graydon has this new project called Airmail, right? What do you think of that?
I think it's a vanity project. I don't see it. I think the guys from now here's another deal that one of his backers is TPG,
TPG?
Texas. It's a private equity guy, Texas Pacific Group. They had gone to the Newhouse family or to Bob Salberg, who was running Condé Nast time, and said, "Look, I know this downsizing is coming and whatnot, but it was just a matter of money. I have a company that's willing to back me if you sell me 50% of Vanity Fair, and we can put in the money to do the things that we have to do." And I don't know if they even bought it as far as the family, but they turned him down. They said no. And that was probably the beginning of the end for Graydon. That was probably a year or more before he left. So then they turn him down, who's coming to them with a big pile of money, and he's telling them you got to start making cutbacks. And I think you just figure that good time to retire. Now TPG is backing him in Airmail, but I think that's, unless something I'm missing, I think it's a vanity project.
Is there any way to rein in Facebook and Google's stealing of advertising revenue, or do you have any recommendations as to how that could happen?
I don't. I would think that at the end of the day, that to me it seems like an antitrust concern. I don't know if they'll prosecute it, but one person scarfing up 80% or two people taking 80% of the digital advertising pie seems to be monopolistic to me. And I don't know how they can solve the problem.
You mentioned the health of some media moguls. You see Rupert around the building. How does he look these days?
It looks fine to me, but I don't really want to comment on stuff I don't know about.
How much has he ceded to Lackland the daily day-to-day operations?
I don't know. No, they don't tell me. I know I see both of them around, but
Really?
so they're both there, but they're not stopping by my desk and filming the interview. I don't really know.
I have the sense that there's more multimedia operations going at the Wall Street Journal necessarily than the Post. Do you have that feeling?
They're in a little bit of a different situation because they've already figured out a way where they can charge people for content. The Times and the Journal. I remember years ago I worked at McGraw-Hill, and one of the recessions, they started paid circulation newsletters where no advertising because they got clobbered. And the guy running the newsletter operation said there's two reasons why people buy newsletters in the business world: fear and greed. And that, to some extent, is a motivation for business people to buy the journal's web product. They're afraid that they'll get left behind, and they're greedy for information. You know, the price of oil changes, that has an enormous impact on the market. Stuff I cover, media, doesn't really impact anybody's. It's interesting, and there's dedicated readers, but if one magazine goes out of business, it doesn't mean you have to scarf up all those ad dollars in the next nanosecond and switch. So it's not as riveting. But the journal has that fear and greed factor. People want the information, they want it fast, they want it now. They'll pay.
Well, I'll tell you an interesting story about that. We used to subscribe to the get-home delivery of the Journal, among several other papers. And my wife and I just discovered we weren't reading the print edition at all, although we used the online all the time. So we called them up and we said, look, we want to get rid of our print edition. We still want to be online subscribers. And they said, fine. I did the calculation. This will be for the next year. And I said, fine. And they said, by the way, at the end of that year, if you decide you want to take the print edition again, we'll give it to you for $1 for the year. I said, why would you do that? And they said, advertisers still want to see some kind of circulation.
Yeah, I didn't know they were doing that, but
Yeah.
it does seem that this price integrity and they like to see that. So it's interesting. You should take it.
We did. We did. No,
Time for one more question. Who's got a good one? I do. Oh, you got another one. Okay, my question is, what's the future of CNN?
It's coming from an old CNN guy.
I don't know. It's under pressure, but I still think it's a viable news source.
They moved to the most expensive real estate you can imagine in this city. I can't understand why they moved to Hudson Yards, but
Yeah. Did they get a good long-term lease? I hope so. I don't know.
Who's the closest thing to Keith Kelley in the media, or is there such a thing?
I don't know that there's. I have competitors like Lucas Alpert on the Journal. Women's Wear Daily does a lot of the stuff that but I don't think there's. It's not like the days when David Carr was at the Times and I was at the Post, and we each knew each other, battling tooth by jowl for stories and
and
scoops.
Paul at the Daily News.
Paul Colfer was at the Daily News. Before him, Celia. He's kind of like an all-encompassing guy, and he aggregates a lot of stuff. I just missed getting my Forbes story to him last night. He goes, I just sent it out. I'm like, I get it tomorrow. So he's kind of he does a lot of stuff. I'm much more like businessy oriented, where he's more of political ramifications of coverage. What's going on with Jim Acosta and press credentials battle and Jim's new book, and he would be more intrigued by.
How is Jim Acosta's new book doing?
I haven't read it, so I don't know if we have any sales figures on it yet. Takes a little bit of a lag time. The excerpts I saw were interesting, but I don't think there's any. I haven't seen any early return numbers.
And Michael Wolff, I can't imagine how.
Michael Wolff, one of my guys. 2000, he does a story on me for when he's still columnist in New York in the magazine, and essentially he was trying to blast the New York Times for their coverage, but I was a beneficiary. He said Keith Kelley has emerged as New York's most influential media reporter. But the subplot of the things was it was before David Carr got there. Alex Kaczynski was running the Times media coverage, and that was a great compliment. More recently, he said, Keith Kelley, once a dominant force, now his column reads like the shipping news. And I remember particularly the day that put down ran. I was running all day on a story to find out. Somebody said, Runner's World is being sold by Rodale. I'm like, all right, well, that's a name title. I'll try. So I tracked down every publisher who had bought anything from Rodale over the years. None of them heard anything about it. All right? So at the end of the day, I said, well, I'm not just going to run a rumor story if I'm convinced it's absolutely false. But by now it's 4 o'clock. I got nothing else. I spent the whole day on this stupid story which came up empty. So what I run was The nominations for the National Magazine Award. It truly was shipping news. The star, the USS will be leaving at 4:07 from the Pier 17. Oh man! Not only did he hate that column, so did my editor-in-chief. He's like, I hate this stuff. But
all the people who won the National Magazine Awards, they loved it. So
they loved it, but they were the only 12 people.
Right. Well, thanks again to our the Media Inc.
All right.
And remember,
we need more like you.
He appears again on Friday, every Wednesday and Friday. It's Keith Kelley. Thank you. And for the fall, we'll be back again in September, and our Lifetime Achievement in October.
All right, thank you. Enjoyed it very much.